Today in episode 26 of the Play Guitar Podcast, it's double stops. Those cool two-note harmonies that are in so many of our favorite songs. It's easy to use the chords and scales you already know to start playing them. Also, I've got listener feedback, so stay tuned. Welcome to episode 26 of the Play Guitar Podcast. I'm Lee, and this is the podcast that's determined to make you a better guitar player. No matter if you're just starting out, if you've been playing for years, this is the show that'll help you become the guitarist that you always wanted to be. On today's episode, I thought a short look at double stops would be a lot of fun. If you're not sure what double stops are, don't worry. I'm sure you've heard them many times. They're a big part of modern music. In fact, they're part of so many riffs and melodies that it would be hard to list all of them here, and I don't have that kind of time. But later on in the show, I do give you a group of songs to check out that use them, and I'm sure that you're familiar with most of them. But having a good command of double stops can really set you apart as a player. They create a lot of harmony in lead guitar and melody lines, and they usually cut through the mix with no problem at all. Plus, they're so much fun to play. I'm going to show you how to use the things that you probably already know and play them in a different way to get these new sounds. This has always been one of my favorite lessons to teach, and I'm so excited to bring it to you today. Also, I just wanted to make sure I said this right here at the beginning of the show so I don't forget. I can't tell you how thankful I am for every single one of you who've been listening to the show and the ones who've been going back and listening through all of the previous episodes. This podcast was a dream of mine for years. And this year, 2018, I was finally able to see it through. I started recording in January, but I didn't release those episodes until the beginning of February. So since then, it's not even been 5 months yet that the show's been out, and wow, it's been great. But it's also been an adjustment for me. There's really no way to know ahead of time how this would be, how it would turn out. And I had an idea of how things would proceed, and of course, it's been nothing like what I thought. It's definitely been better. Things have gone a lot better than I thought they would, but it's also a lot more work than I thought. I've been able to be steady with the main topics, but I really wanted to keep up with the Creating the Band episodes. And it's been a while since I've had the time to put one in. Just want to let you know I still plan to. It's just going to take me a little bit of time to get used to all of this. And once things calm down, I can't wait to get back to writing more music and sharing the experience with all of you. So anyway, thank you all again for hanging in there with me, and onward and upward. Right? Okay, but before we get started today, I want to remind you about my free video lesson called Get Your Blues Soloing Under Control. It's the 6 steps I've found that will give you the right foundations for playing killer blues solos in no time at all. It's a lesson I put together for you guys after getting to spend some time with a few of you, Jason and Chris, for example, and I know that it can really help taking your soloing to in a new direction. The easy way to find it is just go to www.freeblueslesson.com. And when you sign up for this, you'll also get news about all of my podcasts, my videos, and other cool stuff sent directly to your inbox. So go ahead and check that out at freeblueslesson.com. Okay, thanks again for joining me today, and let's go ahead and get started with double stops. Double stops. When you are learning guitar, double stops are something that you hear a lot about. It's a pretty heavy sound for something so simple, double stops. It sounds very final. But we have all heard them in our favorite songs. And it's maybe as part of the main riff, or the background behind the main melody, On the guitar, they tend to cut through a dense mix really well, and they can give a sense of harmony and complexity to a passage on the guitar. You say, wow, that sounds great, very fancy. I need to know what these things are, right? They must be very hard to play. Well, not exactly. Double stops are super simple and they're very effective. I've seen so many students smile when they start to learn about these things. So, okay, all right, let's have it. Enough already. What are they? Are you ready for it? Here it is. Double stops are two notes that are played at the same time. Dun, dun, dun. That's it. What about that? It's just two notes. You can also call it a dyad. They aren't quite as complex sounding as a major or a minor triad, but they're much more harmonically complex than a single note. It's very cool. Two notes. And they can play, you can play them from any two strings, either strings right next to each other or ones that are separated by other strings. It doesn't matter. I was taught that a double stop was two fretted notes, not like an open string and a fretted note. But over the years, I've thought, honestly, who cares? It's two notes. No one's going to listen to what you're playing and go, ooh, that's not a double stop because you use an open string. I'll use anything to get my point across when I'm playing music. If I'm playing double stops and I need a certain note on an open string to achieve what I want to sound like, I'm not going to shy away from using it because it may or may not, be the technique of a double stop. I'm going to go for it. So for me, I think of a double stop as any two notes that you play at the same time. And they sound really cool. And not only that, there are many different ways to use them and in different circumstances that give you drastically different sounds. I love them. I use them all of the time. It doesn't matter what style of music I'm playing in, I use them. Essentially what you're doing is you're harmonizing a melody by yourself. And the way the fretboard, the chord shapes, and the scale patterns are designed makes it real easy to start playing them using the things that you already know. When I first started really taking a notice of double stops, or you could call them dyads, D-Y-A-D-S, or you could call them two-note voicings, however you want to call them. When I started playing in one of those big jazz bands, the ones that had so many trumpets and trombones and saxophones, there's just a lot of musicians playing the same song. It's a very dense sound, and there's lots of layering and very thick, close voicings. But hey, I was just starting. I was just playing guitar, and I played my big all six strings guitar chords, because I had six strings and I could, so I did. But I remember when I was playing with them that the volume of my guitar was always an issue. The director of the band would ask me to turn up because he couldn't hear me. And so I would turn up a bit, and then they'd say, whoa, you're way too loud. It was a struggle. It was hard to be heard without overpowering all of the other instruments. And it was honestly, it was hard to find my place. But I found out it really ended up not being a volume problem at all. It was a voicing problem. So here's how my teenage self figured this out. I remembered I was always impressed by how the keyboard player sounded in that band. You could always hear her, and she was never too loud or too quiet. I started to pay special attention to what she was playing, and I was surprised she wasn't playing something difficult at all. In fact, it looked very easy. The chords she was playing weren't actually triads or seventh chords like I was playing. And the more I paid attention, the more I realized that a lot of the time she was only playing two notes when these big chords with extensions are in the music. She had all of those keys, but she was only playing two notes, and they sounded great. They cut through the mud of this very dense band. So I started experimenting by only playing parts of these big guitar bar chords that I had been playing. And it worked. The less notes I played, the easier it was for me to cut through that sound, to be heard without having so much volume. So there I was being heard along with the keyboard. So now that everyone could hear both of us, I started playing other rhythms that complemented what she was playing. And we started sounding pretty good. We started sounding like a very good rhythm section. And that was a very big learning experience for me. But my other big experience with playing double stops was way later on when I was fronting my 3-piece band. It was just guitar, drums, and bass with me singing. I really wanted to play the song Blue Sky from the Allman Brothers Band. I love that song. But the problem was it was a 3-piece. So I had to choose which of the 2 guitar melodies I wanted to play. And I found out it really didn't matter because whichever one I chose would sound very thin. I was the only lead and rhythm player. So when I played single notes, there was only the bass guitar to harmonically fill things up. So I did the next logical step that anybody would think to do. I tried playing them both at the same time. And surprisingly, it sounded good. It was really pretty good. And the harmony of playing the double stopped, I guess that's what you call it, stopped melodies, it was full enough it kind of bridged the gap between the single notes and chords. It did a bit of both at the same time, and it became a big part of my playing from then on. So double stops equal good in my book. and there's something that when done well can really put a high polish on your guitar playing. So let's take a look at how to go about learning double stops and use them in your own playing. So number 1, what do I need to know to play these things, to play double stops? Well, that should be pretty easy. This isn't something that we need to devote a ton of time on. Most intermediate players already have what they need to get started. There are only 3 things that you need to know to start to use double stops in your playing. Those are chords and scales. But the most challenging is some right hand technique, how you pick these things. Those are the 3. So awesome. I'm sure that you know most of what we need to know already. So let's talk about using these things to get to our double stops. Chords. Chords are by far the easiest way to get great sounding double stops. Just picking 2 of the notes of a chord will get you there. The key is which notes to pick. Each note combination will give you a different color, but it will still match the structure of the chord that you're playing. They could be 2 adjacent strings or 2 separated strings, or even a span of across the strings from the low E to the high E. These notes will definitely work all of the time because they're the chord tones. They will work. The strongest choice of notes that you can choose are the chord tones. You can slide up to them, or you can use them as a starting point to slide down to another chord double stop. There are many, many ways to play these chordal double stops. The next most common way to play double stops is by using scales. By using all of the notes of the scales, you can get so many different colors to your double stops than by just using the chord tones alone. You will have all of the strong notes, but now you have all of the weaker notes at your disposal. So you can paint a much more complex picture with the scale. You just pick 2, but which ones you pick is very important. Double stops notes choices from a scale are usually done by choosing an interval distance of the scales. And then you continue that pattern across the degrees of the scales. I know that sounds difficult, but it really isn't. And I'm going to show you how it works in the next section. The last thing we need to know to be able to perform these cool sounding harmonic figures is how our right hand is going to pick these things. It sounds easy if you're just using 2 adjacent strings. You just pick them. But a lot of the time, we're skipping over strings to get to our 2 different tones. How in the world do you get 2 strings to sound at the same time when they're separated? Well, let's go over these 3 choices we have to pick our 2-note double stops. The first is the most obvious. That's just use the pick. Let's see here. There's two notes. That's the top of a bar chord. Just the down strum. So this works great when all you have are two notes that are on adjacent strings. But if you have any string skipping to do, just picking, it's a little tricky. Most likely the strings in between will get in the way. If you want to just use your pick for notes on separate strings, you have to do some fancy muting. You'll have to touch the strings you don't want to hear, the unwanted strings, so that they don't sound, while leaving the notes that you want to hear, the wanted sounds, ringing out. I'm touching that middle string, kind of muting it. So when I strum all three down, you don't hear that middle one. And this is very tricky, and it's different for every one of these separated double stops, but it's something that you can work on. The next, and the one I use the most, is a hybrid. It's a hybrid of using the pick and then using the extra fingers that you have available. Kind of like this. I'll pick the lower note as usual with my pick, but at the same time I pluck the other note with my middle or ring finger. This is the middle. The combination of the pick note with the pluck note, it has a very cool sound. This style is also great for offset double stops, meaning pick the first note, let it ring, and then pluck the second note over it so they eventually ring together. You hear that a lot. Okay, it's a very cool sound, and it should be a pretty familiar one. So the last right-hand technique that we're going to talk about, and fingerstyle players are screaming at this point, why do we even need to use the pick at all? Just use the thumb to pluck the lower note, and any other finger to pluck the other one. It always sounds great. Just listen to Mark Knopfler and you'll be hearing fingerstyle double stops all over the place. Sometimes you'll see the player's thumbnails long, grown out to give it gives a little bit more of a tack to the lower note. And sometimes you'll even see them using a thumb pick. If you've ever tried this, you know that using a thumb pick is much harder than you would think. But if you want to listen to somebody who really knows, who's the master of the thumb pick, take a listen to Tommy Emmanuel sometime. You'll be glad you did. Okay, so there you go. Those are the three things you need to be able to play double stops. But the next thing we need to look at to play them are the types of chords and scales that we can use. As I said before, using chord notes for double stops is pretty easy, and it's a great way to get into this quickly. First, let's go through some of the different chords that you will commonly find being outlined by double stops. The first has got to be the major triad. It's so common, it's in so many songs, it sounds great, and has a very inside sounding harmony. Let's take a look at this is an E-shaped bar chord. It's the major bar chord that looks like your basic E major open position chord. But we're going to play it as a G chord, so we're going to slide it up to the 3rd fret. That's where the bar is on the 3rd fret there. Okay, so once you've got that chord, let's choose two of the notes to use as double stops. How about the high E string on the 3rd fret? That's a G note. And then on the G string, the 4th fret. That's a B. So we're picking the G string 4th fret and plucking the high E string 3rd fret. These notes, it's a G and a B. That's the root on the high string, and then the 3rd on the G string. It's a very strong sound for the major chord. So I'm going to put a little, let's see here, a little major. So here's some of those double stops. Okay, simple. That should sound very familiar, but you don't have to use just those notes. Let's take advantage of the rest of the chord tones. For this next example, I'm going to use the high E 3rd fret. That's the G note. I'm going to try combining this with each of the other notes of the chord as well. Let's hear what some of the other sounds we can have by combining those together. That's the high E and B string, barred at the 3rd fret, the top of that chord. Here's the one we did before. Now I'm going to go to the next string. That's the D string, 5th fret, and then your first finger back on the high E 3rd fret. How about the A string? They're starting to get kind of far away. Okay. Stop that right there. So it gives a lot of different stops. And those are all separated strings. But what about adjacent strings? Strings that are right next to each other. Let's try that with the same chord, strings together. Okay, so I had some separated strings in the first part. I had some, those are the notes from the chord that are right together. You could play a little bit of your scale patterns and then throw some of those in, like this. Going back and forth between some scale stuff and then your double stops there. So that's major. How about some minor sounds? Let's play some G minor double stops. And this time we're going to do this around the bar chord shape that looks like the A minor chord. And we want it in G, or I guess we're kind of staying in G today. So we're going to slide that A minor bar chord all the way up to the 10th fret. And so I started off with some separated strings. Now some adjacent strings. Pretty neat. This first part, very John Mayer, I think. Okay, so that's some minor sounds. Some little double stops there for minor. We can do the same thing with the G7 bar chord at the 3rd fret. Let's try some dominant double stop sounds. So let me put a new chord in for this one. Okay, those are some adjacent and separated G7th double stops. Let's try a G9 chord. How about that? Little James Brown kind of sound here. Okay, that was the G9. How about the G13? Let's hear about some double stops on those. I'm sure you've all heard that a bunch of times. That's going up to the 13th. And back to the 5th and the flat 7th. Okay, so there's a bunch of chords where you could pull out a lot of different double stops, all with different sounds to color your lines. But if we're talking about just using two notes, there's some other things we could take a look at. Namely, power chords and octaves. Both of those use two notes, and they're very common with guitars. Are they double stops? Well, by my very loose definition, I would guess they would be, because I said you just have to have two notes. So those are some other ideas that you could throw. Some octaves and some power chords in there as well. Okay, so let's move on. Enough of the easy stuff. Let's move on to scales. You typically hear scales used as double stops in a harmonized type line. There's no rules to this. You can combine any note you want, but it's very common to hear the double stop notes a third apart, or a fourth apart, or a fifth apart. So on it goes. To make this easy, we're going to play the first note of the scale. And then to find the other note, the other of the two notes that we need, we will skip a note of the scale. That should sound familiar to anyone who's heard the chord episode that I give. We're going to skip a note. That gives us the first and the third notes of the scale, and that's an interval of a major third. After that, we can continue the process with each degree of the scale. We could do the second and the fourth. And then we can move to the third and the fifth. Then we can move to the fourth and the sixth, etc. Just keep going on. So take a listen to these G major double stops created with a third harmony. We can continue this idea, but with different intervals. So let's say we'll use fourths this time. Let's skip two notes each from our major scale double stops this time. So let's try that. One. Oh, there we go. So for our first note, the second note, the fourth above that, third note, fourth above that, fourth note. Let's see how that sounds over the background track. Pretty neat. Pretty neat. A little bit different sound using all the fourths right there. So you can do this with the minor scale as well, but to save time, we're getting kind of far in the show now. I'm going to go ahead and go to the second half of the big four, the pentatonic scales. And using double stops with pentatonic scales is so much fun. You hear it all the time in all types of music. It's so easy. All of the notes just work together so well. You don't have to think a lot playing double stops with the pentatonic scales. So let's try it out. First, the minor pentatonic. The one that everybody knows, Smoke on the Water's main riff. This kind of is like that. Those are dyads from the minor pentatonic scale. And always I demonstrate the majority of these pentatonic examples with pattern 1, and today's not an exception. So let's play pattern 1 in the key of G, since that's been our theme today, the key of G. And let's play the G minor pentatonic pattern 1 at the 3rd fret. The way pattern 1 is set up, it's so easy to play double stops on those consecutive strings. Most of the time, all you have to do is just bar your finger over one string to catch both of them at the same time. Using the skip a note idea with the scale is so easy because most of them are right under your fingers as well. So that was minor pentatonic double stops. This also works out great for the major pentatonic scale as well. So let's keep this in G. Let me do a major now. So that's a little bit of the major pentatonic sound. As you get more advanced, you can try these dyads and many other scales as well. The diminished and the whole tone scales, they're great because of their symmetrical pattern shapes. It works very well. But as you get more familiar with the modes, you can also try all these double stops based on the modes as well. And finally, don't be afraid to use double stops to get some more tense sounds or outside sounds as well. You can always use, the half step above or below trick to add some tension. I just took the top two strings on the G major chord, a half step away, adding some tension. Try it on the next set of strings. Pick any of these easy double stops and play it one fret off and let it ring there for a while before you resolve it back to the regular inside sound. The longer you let it ring before resolving, the more tension you add to the sound. So now that we've gone through all of the ways to play them, let's get more familiar with double stops. There's so many great songs that feature double stops, so I would like for you to take some time this week and do some critical listening. Take a listen to these songs and see if you can spot the double stops. Little Wing by Stevie Ray Vaughan or Jimi Hendrix, either one. Band on the Run by Wings. Johnny B. Good, which is Chuck Berry, of course. Brown Eyed Girl, Van Morrison. Fortunate Son by CCR. Listen to Stormy Monday by the Allman Brothers. Money for Nothing by the Dire Straits. And finally, you can't leave this one out, Smoke on the Water by Deep Purple. If you have some more time on your hands, see if you can figure out what the dyads are yourself and relate them to a known chord shape or a scale pattern that you have. If you can relate the sounds of these songs to patterns that you know, they quickly become yours. And then you can use them in your own solos anytime you want. Well, there you have it. Who knew that just 2 notes could have all of these different sounds and applications? What we went over in this podcast was an introduction to and definition of double stops. I talked about the 3 things you need to know to play them. That's chords, scales, and a good right hand technique. Next, I talked about some examples of the different chords, the major, minor, the 7th, 9th, and the 13th. I also talked about some of the scales that you could use, the major scale, minor scale, pentatonic, major, and minor. You can use those to play double stops too. So I gave a few ideas of where to go once you're comfortable with these examples, and I gave a list of some famous songs that you should listen to get familiar with double stops. So what do you think? Have you used double stops in your playing? What are your favorite ways to play them? We would all love to know. So please leave a comment on the show notes page, and that's at www.playguitarpodcast.com/026. This is listener feedback. This is where if you have a comment or a question, or you just want to say hi, get in touch with me. I'd be happy to help you if I can. You can always email me at feedback@playguitarpodcast.com, or you can use the comments on the show notes page. I've got a contact form on the site. I'm on social media. Just get in touch with me. You can find me. I'm pretty easy to find. This week, we got some great email. Alistair B. shared his situation and his practice schedule with me and said some very nice things. And he said he enjoyed the episode 20, the Understanding Blues Guitar episode. Thank you, Alistair. I sure appreciate you getting in touch with me. And I have a hard time finding time to practice myself. So I'm in the same boat. And this is something that I'm working on. And I'm hearing this from a lot of folks about, finding an effective way to practice in a short amount of time. And this is something that I've been working on with my group classes last year. So I know a lot about it. I've got some ideas of something to put out there for there. So just kind of hold on for that one. But thank you for the email, Alistair. I sure appreciate it. The next email was from Scott W. He says he really likes the podcast and he's starting from the beginning so he'll build a strong foundation. And he wanted to know also about building some finger strength. So you should find, I also have a blog post with that, but there's an episode all about the technique exercises. And they really help with finger strength. But Scott, thank you for getting in touch with me. I sure appreciate it. The next was Hanzo H. And he was talking about he's wanting to get into teaching guitar. I haven't had a chance to reply back to him, but I will soon, probably tomorrow. But thank you so much for that. I know I love teaching guitar, and it's a great field to get into. And I've got some tips for you, and I'll get in touch with you about that. Next was Twitter. I checked back in with Austin. I've been wanting to see how he's gone, and he was talking about learning some Stevie Ray Vaughan. And I've got some ideas about that too. I shared some stuff with him, but I have an idea for playing in the style of Stevie Ray Vaughan, something I've done a lot of and I understand pretty well. And I have it. Let me know if that's something that you're interested in. I think there's been several people who've asked about Stevie Ray Vaughan, so it's something I think should be coming up in the near future. Also on Twitter, I got a tweet from Jay Sauce, who says he's loving my original post and also my curated content. So if you follow me on Twitter, what I have is I have a revolving list. I forget how many I have now of other people's content that I think that I would share with my own students. Really good stuff. And I have this list and it's just revolving. I just put it out all the time. It takes about a month to get through all of them. But I also put in my own blog posts and podcast episodes. And that's how I've been going with Twitter. And it's been really helping a lot of folks. So follow me on Twitter at PlayGuitarPDCST if you were interested in checking some of that out. Okay. I also don't want to forget the show's Facebook group. You can become a member by going here to www.playguitargroup.com. That address will take you right to the Facebook page, and that's where you can sign up. And I highly recommend you do. It has been so much fun getting to know everybody, seeing all of your gear and your video clips. What a great bunch of folks we have there now. And right here, I want to thank all of this week's new members. So my thanks to Christopher, Robert A., Carlos M., Jason A., Pernbrata D., Dennis A., Alvaro C., Claudio R., Greg P., Eileen M., Sarah M., Steve W., Kyle C., and Andrew L. Thank you so much for joining, and I look forward to hanging out with all of you there. Okay, so that is a wrap. Thank you for joining me today for the Play Guitar Podcast. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the show on iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Also, I'd really appreciate if you could leave me an iTunes review for the show. If you are interested in online lessons, go on over to PlayGuitarAcademy.com and join my early adopter list to get news on the opening of the site and an early adopter discount. Also, follow me on all of my different social media pages. Links to them are at PlayGuitarPodcast.com. Thanks again, and I will see you on the next episode.